So we can kick the last session for today off. So maybe some introductory words from my side. Now we have a panel discussion with actually 3 GitLab members, with John Jeremiah, who is Product Marketing Leader, Mahesh Kumar, Product Marketing Manager, and Colin Fletcher, Manager, Market Research and Customer Insights, all from GitLab. And they will discuss the current state of DevOps, because I think in the past years, the DevOps concept sounded very promising as a way to enable developers to publish code and to build software faster. And they will take the magnifying glass on this principle and have a look at the past time and see, well, how is the current state? Can DevOps live up to this challenge, or is it already living up to the task? So hi guys from my side. I think they're all there. Hi Mahesh, Colin, and John.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi there. I hope you're doing fine.
I'm waving and I'm not on video because I've got a Zoom problem. So what I'll do is I'm going to go out and come back in really fast. But while I do that, I'd like to invite Colin and Mahesh to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their background. I know both Colin and Mahesh bring amazing background and breadth to this. Everything from stories about Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, which Mahesh can tell and share from his past experience, to I know Colin has stories about, I think it was a guy who wears turtlenecks chastised him once. His name was Steve Jobs chastised Colin once, and he can share some of those stories. But I'd like, while I restart Zoom, Mahesh, Colin, if you introduce yourselves, I'll come back in and we'll kick off this, what will be kind of a fun discussion.
Sure.
Go ahead, Colin.
Thanks, John. Hey, everybody. Thanks for spending some time with us. I'm Colin Fletcher. As noted, I have the privilege of leading our market research customer insights team here at GitLab. What that means is that we work with industry analysts, so folks from Gartner and Forrester, et cetera. We work with many of hopefully you customers in our customer reference program, customer advisory board, and we also manage our work on the peer review sites, things like Gartner Peer Insights and G2 Crowd as well. Prior to GitLab, I was at Gartner, where I was an industry analyst, research director in the IT operations space, covered a number of topics for a number of years. And prior to that, I worked in different product marketing and management functions at different vendors. And prior to that, I was an IT practitioner of various flavors. So that's me.
Awesome.
Mahesh.
Thanks, Colin. Mahesh?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Colin. My name is Mahesh Kumar, and I manage the competitive intelligence team at GitLab. And part of our charter is to look at sort of the DevOps landscape in a very comprehensive way. And we do comparisons between GitLab and so many other vendor products, which you might have seen on the DevOps tools landscape page on our website. Prior to coming into GitLab, I got my career started very early on at a company called LoudCloud, which I'd like to call the original cloud computing company, started by Mark Andreessen, and then went on to run the configuration management database business at Mercury Interactive and HP, and did VP of marketing at a couple of security startups. So you could say my career's kind of shifted left over time. And here I am at GitLab, which probably the ultimate shift left company of all. So very happy to be with you all and share some interesting insights.
Awesome. Thanks, Mahesh. And I appreciate the flexibility of having some AV issues this morning. But so I lead our product marketing team at GitLab, and I've been doing this for the last I've been here for almost 2.5 years. And prior to GitLab, I was, I think we crossed paths. I was also at HP Software for a while, where I was working in product marketing and evangelism, helping to build a platform called TechBeacon. And prior to that, I had the fortune of being on the other side, of being a buyer, of being an IT director and a leader, implementing software solutions and leading change. So I've seen this from both sides, and I kind of love how we're describing our roles as we've shifted left earlier and earlier in the life cycle. So I want to kick it off. I put a slide up with sort of the overall agenda of what we wanted to talk about, some topics. And the first one was, we talked about the state of DevOps. And, a way to phrase this, and I'd be either Colin or Mahesh, I'd like to hear your thoughts of, is DevOps sticking in the industry? Is it really sticking, or are we waiting for, what I would call the change advisory or the change prevention board? Is it preparing to come back? Is it looking for ways to come back and slow DevOps down? Is DevOps here to stay? What do you think?
Colin?
Sure. I could take a first bit on that. So I'll answer a couple of those questions directly, and then I'll provide a bit of context and hopefully not put you to sleep in the process. So to answer the question, is it here to stay? Yes. And is it? Is the Change Prevention Board preparing to return? Maybe. I'll say it that way. And here's the context around that. I personally find, and I'll put that on there, right? This is my opinion, that so much of the discussion in so many different channels around quote unquote DevOps still seems to be focused around what I don't think is quite the right frame. It often gets talked about in terms of job titles, process, frameworks, discussed in terms of tool adoption, certain styles of working, certain sizes of teams even. I think I'm probably not the only one that's found themselves in the middle, and that's an important way of describing it. Finding yourself in the middle of folks that are equating, the adoption of agile principles in terms of whether or not a team is a particular size or not, and that being a go, no-go decision on whether or not it's something that could be adopted by a particular organization. All of that said, what I think is the right answer, and this is or the right frame, and it's why, or I'll say a more correct frame, and it's why I say yes, it's here to stay, is that I think that DevOps really represents, it's really better understood as a full-on generational change. And when I say generational change, I mean literal generational change. I honestly feel like and believe very strongly that it's us, it's this group of people at this point in time that are choosing to redefine what being a technologist is. What is the purpose of providing and building and supporting technology? And if you view it in that kind of literal generational lens, suddenly I think a lot of things make a lot more sense around how long is this going to take, right, to get to some state of maturity. Where are we and what kinds of changes can we expect and barriers that we have to overcome? What are the educational requirements? What are the job description requirements? What are the business value definitional requirements? All of these things are what happen, when change is looked at over such a kind of a longer kind of time scale. So hopefully that didn't put you to sleep, but that's kind of why I think we're easily still in the first, I'll just say third of this journey. Mahesh, I don't know if you agree or disagree.
I agree. I think I just want to add some sort of trends in the industry, which is everything is software defined, right? Everything is moving towards software defined. Notion of software driving infrastructure, right? Notion of software sort of driving the whole sort of the monitoring process and the correction process and scaling and such. So given this trend, I feel like there is more and more activity is moving towards the developer, along with cloud and agile. I mean, I think this is the confluence of trends that are coming together and driving more activity towards the developer, who in the past, if you think about it, even 5, 10 years ago, they would just write code and there ends that. And then you have these other gates through which an application passed. So a lot of those gates are now sort of out of the way, or are getting out of the way. At least the organization realizes that. So that's causing a much stronger adoption of DevOps within an organization, and the need for speed. So there are business drivers that are also embedded in it that are driving that. So I don't see that stopping anytime soon. If you think about us having gone from virtualization to containerization to now Lambda functions, every one of those big changes are basically placing more on the hands of the developer to be able to directly drive. And as that technology continues to evolve, we're only going to see greater adoption of the DevOps. And it takes slightly different forms in different companies, depending on the organizational processes, but the trend is definitely moving in the right direction.
I want to come back on that last bit though about the change prevention board thing and get y'all's take on that too though. I seriously believe that is still very much in our collective hands. I think sometimes people forget, right, with all this forward momentum, right, that many of the organizational and process frameworks and control structures, et cetera, didn't just show up because people had some bad ideas at some point. It showed up for a reason. It showed up because there was a lack of clarity, there was a lack of ownership, a lack of communication, all of these different kind of complicating factors that resulted in, we should look at some of these control and process structures of the past, like ITIL, et cetera, as a response, not as a cause, right? So I think it's kind of up to us to maybe do things in ways that maybe minimize that inevitable kind of control cycle, and or shape it into something that we actually agree to do, that we all kind of want to some extent.
Because it's not as if those processes were put into place just to be an obstacle or just to make it harder to make changes. They were really, there was a reason, there was an intent to improve stability, to improve availability, to deliver a better service to our end users, to our customers. I mean, that was always the spirit behind those processes. And frankly, I think that's still the spirit behind what's going on in DevOps. It's about enabling the business to have faster feedback, to innovate and to iterate and to go faster. And the only way you do that is by, what we've been talking about, shifting left and moving in that direction. So, so let's move on. I want to step forward into a question more about what's happening in the market and what we're seeing. What sort of trends are we seeing in the vendor landscape? I mean, we play in this space. We're both a vendor and I think we're bigger than a vendor in the sense that we're really a community of people who are all contributing to build GitLab, who are all contributing to implement and to innovate around how do we deliver better solutions and collaborate more effectively and deliver faster. So both of you are really plugged in many, many different ways. What are you seeing happening? What's happening in the tools in the vendor landscape?
I could take that initially, and Colin, certainly, please add your perspectives. I think the biggest trend that I'm seeing, from a vendor landscape is this realization that this whole concept of an integrated single app is almost like a table stakes now going forward for a lot of DevOps players. GitLab has been a pioneer in terms of that, having a very tightly integrated platform that, it's a single platform essentially. And I could easily name 4 other vendors, major vendors, that have actually moved in that direction. And I think it's not necessarily business or things like that is causing it. It's really the realization that the work product, right, that the unit of work that moves across some core, sort of leverage points within the DevOps lifecycle is the same. For example, the application, right? When you're doing source code management of continuous integration or CD or security. I mean, the core unit of work there is the application, and that's the one that's sort of moving through those various phases. And so, given that approach, I think what people are realizing, at least from a vendor standpoint, is having a very tightly integrated sort of a framework for moving that work product as quickly across these stages as you possibly can gives our customers a competitive advantage over others that have multiple different products that you have to sort of cobble together. And so there is always this data translation process, and the screens are not the same. So any of those changes are actually slowing down work. And so that's why you see a lot of vendors, especially the major ones, they're all kind of adding these other capabilities. They start at one point, either source code, and then they start to add CI and CD and security and so on and so forth, or they are in the sort of the distribution space where they are distributing the bits to operations, and then they're moving more left into continuous integration in a CD and so on and so forth. So it's like, it's a giant sort of a migration or an expansion of their software footprint, either starting in source code, moving right, or going left more from an operational standpoint. And I think it's because the work product is absolutely the same, which is application, right, moving through these phases.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. Just maybe put a slightly different way. I think we have, but not vastly different. I think we have reached this, going back to kind of that maturity or journey kind of element. I think we've clearly hit, from a market standpoint, a step, right? A key kind of point, and that point being what we usually see in particularly IT software markets is a clarity, a consolidation and clarity around a specific set of market needs of enterprise or developer or buyer needs. And once you start to see that, one of the ways that that has kind of reached a certain critical mass right out there, a certain level of agreement on like what are the things that we need to be able to be successful, whatever that means in your particular organization or within that particular market, is when you see larger firms start to buy up and round up portfolios. They've let smaller vendors, innovative startups go out and experiment, try, figure out what the needs are, spend their own money figuring out what those needs are, and then go and buy, right? And therefore kind of that as one consolidating motion. Another kind of market consolidation motion is that we continue to see is that we see increasing partnerships and or combinations of relative peers in terms of market size kind of come together, because we both know we need to do Z. I do X really well, you do Y really well. But the customers, what they are willing to put the effort around defining a business justification, fighting for budget for, is Z. And in order to make that happen, let's do that. And I'd love to believe that somehow that was all very intentional and conscious. I don't think so necessarily, but that is how, that's another kind of move that we've certainly seen within the market over the last 6 months or so in particular.
Yeah, it's a fast moving market. The change is happening faster and faster. I think the way often we work at GitLab with minimum viable change, I think in the market we're seeing, I look at competitors, they're releasing faster and faster. It's very much where change is the dynamic, and I think it's one that the pace is accelerating. Yeah, I don't know if you see it any differently, but I'm watching where we're at from a time perspective. I want to make sure there's time for questions. If people have questions, you can please put them into the Q&A box, and I'll be monitoring that as we go. But so feel free to chime in if you have a question. We'll weave that into the discussion as we go. But I want to kind of go on to another topic, I think, which is probably resonates with everyone at some level. You know, I thought back and thinking back to just a few months ago, we were doing, you know, annual planning as to, you know, what are we going to try to achieve this year? And then in February, we got together and we had a big event with sales, a kickoff event, and we were eager to start the year. And in February, you know, we had these grand plans, and you know, nothing at all has changed since February. Nothing at all, except for a global pandemic. We're all now working remotely. We're socially distancing. Now, when we talk about flattening the curve, you know, it means something other than, you know, doing lots of sit-ups in order to flatten your personal curves. It's something that we're living all the time. And a lot of times, I think people are struggling, and we're dealing with this idea of working remotely. And at GitLab, we've been all remote from the beginning. And, you know, Mahesh, Colin, I'm curious, what advice do you have to anyone else out in the call who's listening? What's your advice for working in an environment like we're in today, where we're all remote?
You know, it's something that I'm not. I think I'm human. I'm like everybody. That can always get better about it. But one of the things that it's really highlighted, even this particular situation, and I've seen this in the case of a number of our customers as well, is that the role of documentation / over communication, or level of communication that you need to invest time into written, quote unquote, written forms, in terms of documentation. It could be filling out issues. It could be just how many words, how descriptive are you in a DM or channel conversation in Slack, right? However you're communicating in ways where the intent is to enable someone else to be able to use that information and make a decision, take the next step, do whatever it is they need to do when they can, and whoever that might be, right? That flexibility just increases that demand for that level of documentation. I'll just use that term. And it's one of those things that it can feel at times like a grind, because you're like, why am I having to spell out every single kind of, you know, dot every I, cross every T kind of thing? But it's a requirement for working remote. It just, I increasingly appreciate the level of a requirement that is to be effective remote.
I just want to add that, you know, collaboration is an important sort of, you know, aspect to it, and how we collaborate and communicate has changed a little bit. We're all about now video calls, right? I mean, everyone is a video call away from somebody else. And I'm sorry to say, John and Colin, I don't have your phone numbers. I just don't have your phone numbers. I just say, okay, let's get on a call, you know, video call. Let's talk face to face. So I can remember even just a few years back, 2 years back, maybe, when you store people's phone numbers, your instinct, if you wanted to get hold of them right away, is to pick up the phone and call them. And you don't do that anymore. So now it's like, let's interact, let's collaborate live, you know. So, and I think that's a great thing. I feel it just makes organizations a lot more efficient and be very connected, you know, when you can see somebody and kind of have that communication and collaborative environment.
Yeah, I would think too, if there's anything else, I think hopefully it's having the effect too of helping people focus more, even more so on results, mm-hmm. as opposed to the mechanistic elements that, you know, end up in a result, for that same kind of element, because things are so much more dynamic, particularly at the moment, but in general. It's one of those things, I think it's a forcing function to pay more attention to, you know, the outcome, as opposed to necessarily the way you get there.
Totally agree. And think about the benefits as well, right? No longer do you spend half an hour or an hour or more each day commuting, whether it's in a subway or in a car or in an Uber or whatever to home, from home to work and back every day. All of that time wasted. Now you can actually, in many cases, be productive from wherever you are. And that's been a benefit we've had at GitLab. One of the resources, I want to make sure everyone's aware, we actually documented how we work in our handbook. Our handbook is a repository of knowledge of our best practices and how we work. It covers everything from beginning to end, to how we onboard, how we recruit, how engineering works. But there's a section of the handbook that we took out, we pulled out, we created an ebook, which is all about our best practices on working remotely. It talks about documentation. It talks about collaboration and using Zoom and communication. And so it's a really, really good resource. It's available on our website. If you Google the remote handbook, you can download it and use it as a tool to look at, how can you apply it. But I think there's a ton of best practices, and it's something that, to be quite honest, I don't think I'd ever want to go back to working in a physical office again. The all remote is so powerful, and it's I don't know, I cherish getting together in person with people, but I don't have to do it every single day. So I really welcome that. So let's go on. When we talk to people about how they think about driving and doing a DevOps transformation, you talk to leaders about this, and I've talked to them for years about what it looks like to make the change and to evolve how they do it. A lot of times, one of the challenges comes up is, well, how do I justify the cost? I know when I led a development transformation, we justified the cost by reducing rework. We were focused on cost to quality, and we believed that we could reduce the amount of rework and therefore improve our cost of quality. That would pay for the program. How do you see organizations and leaders looking at ROI and justifying the investment they're making in digital and DevOps transformations?
Yeah, I think in my conversations with a lot of customers, there are three key elements to justifying the ROI on DevOps investment. The first one really is speed, right? Which is, it allows the organization to go from code to production much faster, right? Or even earlier, if you think about it, from planning all the way to production much faster. So they're able to move faster and respond to market demands. And so that is a huge driver, and also making part of it is developer experience and developer productivity goes up very significantly when you're able to move faster, at least as it pertains to the tooling. And a corollary, sort of a side benefit of this moving faster, is your quality kind of goes up because now you have the levers to move things faster. You do much smaller changes, more number of changes, but much smaller changes. So this has a sort of side benefit of increasing quality, because now you're not having these big omnibus changes happening, because you can do a change, quickly see its impact, and sometimes even immediately decide to roll it into production. So quality is another driver, which is, either it's code coverage, the number of tests they're able to run every time they make a change, all those factors actually contribute, to increase in quality. And the third piece is your cost, right? Tool consolidation. If you have, with the move to a single application or DevOps platform, some call it, you are now starting to consolidate what you did with 3 or 4 or 5 different tools into one, one product or one tool. And so that is also another driver for enterprises looking to, move, do this, DevOps transformation. So I think those are 3 big drivers. And I know there is one more, hopefully Colin will touch on that, and we can come back to that if necessary.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mahesh. And yeah, it's something that I've had the privilege of working with both Mahesh and John on. Is a lot of our work talking with our customers and with other folks around the industry around how do you really do this? At the end of the day, define the value, make the business case, etc. And yeah, I think the kind of put it in a slightly different way. One of the key things that we see is that general efficiency, what I'll call efficiency, via automation, automation of activities, automation of this kind of integrated workflow, the assumptions that frankly DevOps, one of the assumptions that DevOps is effectively based on, or to make it real, is a level of automation that is assumed that's there. So we see it in terms of the automation capabilities that enable faster delivery of code, that enable or releases, that enable automated testing in ways that people could just set it, forget it. It just gets done. They don't have to do a lot of manual work. We're seeing the impact of those faster releases. So if I can release these updates to applications or new applications that generate revenue much more frequently, then that can result in increased literal top-line revenue growth. Certainly there is the tool consolidation value as well. So if I'm using, fewer tools to accomplish more to varying degrees, then that sets up a conversation around that. But yeah, I think the value of automation kind of expressed in these different ways is important, and something consistent. Evidenced perhaps most recently in a Forrester Total Economic Impact study that we recently completed, where we worked with a handful of our customers to find out what value did they get from our solution in particular, and it fell into those categories of improved development and delivery efficiency, of increased revenue from more and faster releases, of improved code quality, of tool consolidation value. So we've seen through a number of these efforts and research that there is starting to be this consolidation of an understanding of what is the value, where does it lie. If it's not in one of those things right now, it may be further down the road as you adopt more, as you adopt further or get further down the DevOps journey, you see more value that way. I think it's taken us this long to get to this point, frankly, which is good, which is why it's always a good time to get in now as well, because we have reached this level of some consistency around real value that can be reasonably expected given investment into DevOps.
I just want to narrate one, sort of a bit of data that I got from one of our customers. They said, that they went from 57 distinct actions that they had to take previously when they had, essentially the quote unquote tool chain, right? And when they migrated to GitLab, it was literally 2 steps, right? So they've actually done very detailed time and motion studies on all the things, different screens, press this, click this, and they've kind of eliminated a lot of that. And that's what sort of one of the justifications in their organization is just not just the speed, but the developer experience. And to your point, Colin, just this whole concept of automation, right? And that's what allows you to kind of go from 57 steps to 1 or 2, because you've automated a lot of those intermediate steps, and done it in code as opposed to having a person sort of walk through these screens.
I don't know how many % fewer steps that is. I'd like to do the math. It's a really, really, really big number. I also love how, if you simplify this down, the value is better, faster, cheaper. It's about delivering better, higher quality, more secure code that's compliant. It's about doing it faster than you've ever done it before, getting feedback faster, so that way you can be more responsive to the market. And it's also about doing it more economically, more efficiently. Cheaper is the wrong meaning. I think efficiency is the key. And in fact, if I think about the results of when I listen to and talk to executives, usually one of the top, if not the #1 objective on their KPIs that they're driving towards is running an efficient organization. Everyone's under pressure. I recently have been running a study right now and looking at that. And even in today's times, efficiency is top. Is still the #1 thing that they have to worry about. So Thank you for that. That's awesome. And Colin, is the TEI analysis, is that available for people to get if they wanted to look at it?
It is, and I'll make sure to get that link out to anybody that wants
Cool.
it here on the deal.
Yeah, it's an interesting study, and the process that Forrester goes through, I think, is amazing. How they go out, they interview, and they build the whole model, and they build it all, and it's very much I was always impressed how independent it was and how they really approached that to try to measure and build that out. But we were talking about this. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm watching the clock as well, 9 minutes. So I've got a couple questions. First off, in our agenda, we said, where's the SEC in DevOps? And what are you seeing is happening in the world of DevOps? Is security an inherent part of it? What's happening? How are roles and relationships changing? Is it changing?
I'll take a first swing on it. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it is. I hate to say that there's sides, but I think most of us, particularly within viewing enterprise environments, understand that there's often sides, right? There's often organizations and teams to how security is handled. But as evidenced in the recent Gartner Magic Quadrant for Application Security Testing, it's something that they also noted, that there's increased interest and activity from both security professionals, just in general, big S security professionals, IT security professionals, in getting the data, getting visibility into the activities and the code itself associated with security and the development activities. And certainly developers want their code running, right, as quickly as possible, and definitely don't need, are not looking to get interesting rework requests and what have you to address security concerns once it's already live. They like to get all of that kind of handled as much as possible. So there's incentives for both to do it, which is great. I think there's awareness of incentives to work together and shift security left. There's the efficiencies of doing so. If there are all the things that are the known things that we can just avoid because we know that we need to do them, why not get it done earlier in the process, right? It just makes sense. I think that realization is growing in general. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, Mahesh.
Absolutely. I think there is, there's this rework avoidance, right? And that's the big part that's driving it. And we find that, developers increasingly want to do it because they don't want to go through this rework process. So they kind of, adopting security, best practices, the scanning, the security static testing, dynamic testing, things that they can do, within their environment in a much more efficient, fast manner before it goes to a formal security group. That group is not going away, just to be clear. I mean, they are there. You need those eyes. So their role is shifting from pointing out issues to now validating that the application is indeed secure as per their standards, right? So by avoiding that rework, what happens is it has to go through fewer sort of back and forth between the security team and the development team. And that's been hugely beneficial because, as you said, some of these issues are table stakes for a lot of organizations, and it doesn't require a huge trip back to the security organization and back to the development organization to kind of close the loop over there. So they avoid that. And that's, that's one of the big benefits. And that allows security organizations to focus a little bit more deeper on other things that may not be that easy to catch, and a lot of other testing that they have to do, which they have some very specific and specialized knowledge. So that's that's how I see sort of the whole security trend of shifting left. And as more knowledge becomes baked in code, you're going to have more of it done by the developers.
No, indeed, and it's interesting. I always thought it was ironic, right? We would always say, in all of the training you'd go to your annual security training, we'd always go to security training. Security is everyone's job, right? Security is everyone's job. Then why is it that security has their own tools and we're not enabling developers with the tools to test their own code? if it's everyone's job, then we should really make sure that everyone has the ability to ensure that they're shipping really secure code. And that's, I think, one of the big trends I think that's changing, is that more and more as we quote unquote shift left, what we're really doing is we're giving the developers and the people that are implementing code, that are writing code, the opportunity to have fast feedback. So that way they ship more secure, more reliable code, exactly what you both said. So moving to the last question, and if we have questions from the audience, we'll take them. Feel free, put them in chat, put them in the Q&A. But the last topic is compliance. Compliance is one of these necessary processes that are important for an organization to know that people are following the processes, that they're doing what they said they would do, that they're delivering the way that they've intended to deliver. What are you seeing? How is DevOps impacting compliance activities, audit, compliance, et cetera? Are you seeing that having an impact at all?
Yeah, I think certainly we see that in a very significant way. Organizations, when they think of compliance, there is a security angle to it, which is compliance with security policies. I'm going to set that aside for a second. We all understand, we've just talked about it. A couple of other things that are important from a compliance standpoint is making sure that the roles and permissions on who can make change, who can roll things off to production, sign off on changes going into production or through various gates that you might have set up in your organization. That's one aspect of it that that drives the whole compliance piece, right? So when people come in and audit, they want to make sure that the right people signed off on on the change. And the other aspect is the sort of automation of audits. A lot of times we find that especially in regulated industries, customers need like a complete top to bottom audit on every change, everything that happened in that organization. So they want a record, a single source of truth record of everything that happened. And it's not just what you pushed into production. It's like what change was made, what code change was made, who signed off on it, all the way through, your compliance checks around security policies and so on. They want everything in one place so it's easy to audit. In fact, one of our customers just justified a purchase on that one single capability, right? Which is like, hey, I can shave off so much time and get so much more, high fidelity data around my audits and be very, compliant with any regulator that might come and take a look at it. So those are things that are really driving the audit and compliance activities from DevOps.
I still see oddly that there's still, depending on who you ask, for folks not involved in DevOps initiatives, there's still some unwarranted kind of trepidation, fear, uncertainty about DevOps impact on these activities. But what is consistent is that typically still, as soon as someone actually starts talking with development teams and looking at the systems that they're using, to support their tool chains and all of the information, as Mahesh related, right, that's out there because people are working in the open, it has that documentation requirement, has that chain of custody requirement. It's there. Very quickly it becomes, why weren't we doing this before? This is weird. I just don't get it. That kind of response is still fairly universal. So I know I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful that awareness that no, it's the opposite. It's actually more transparent. It's more visible. It's more audit and compliance friendly than the previous way of doing things. It's really helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree, Colin. I've seen and witnessed numerous examples where teams have implemented and adopted DevOps practices of using a pipeline to automate build and test and to automate the compliance checks, to automate the processes that they think they have to enforce, which leads to better audits, more compliant, better compliance with their processes, and the audits are easier and better. And then when you bring things together into a single application like we've been doing, it makes it easier to have controls in place, to have consistency, to be able to report against it. All those things get better. And I agree, people are often skeptical when you talk about delivering as fast as DevOps promises to deliver. They think that means that we're short-circuiting the process. But the reality is the process gets stronger. And I think that's one of the things that's worth celebrating. So, you know, I'm looking at the time. We've hit the end. I don't see questions. So I'm going to quickly wrap up. Mahesh, Colin, thank you really so much. This was a really fun discussion. I've enjoyed interacting and hearing your perspective on some of these topics of what is the state of DevOps and what's changing. And with that, I want to thank everyone in the audience who's been, you know, going along on this journey with us. Thank you for staying with us, and hopefully everyone, you know, has a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe, and good luck with shipping code faster than ever. Artin, back to you.
Thank you very much, John, and also thank you very much, Mahesh and Colin, for going into the questions in your discussion. Well, I think even the people who didn't answer questions directly were following with a huge interest on what you were saying. So thanks again for being on the show at ScaleUp 360 Software Delivery.